The CHIPS Act set aside more than $52 billion to incentivize chip companies to manufacture on U.S. soil. Samsung's building a huge $17 billion fab in Taylor, Texas, promising to make its first advanced chips in the U.S. next year.
What's going on is just remarkable. It's enormous.
I really want to be a bedrock for U.S. industry.
Now, Apple's silicon team has scaled to thousands of engineers, working across chip labs in places like Israel, Germany, Austria, the UK, Japan, and the US, in Austin, San Diego, and Silicon Valley.
I think one of the most, if not the most profound change at Apple, certainly in our products over the last 20 years, is how we now do so many of those technologies in-house.
For nearly 30 years, Nvidia's chips have been coveted by gamers, shaping what's possible in graphics and dominating the entire market since it first popularized the term graphics processing unit with the GeForce 256.
Will you be moving any of your manufacturing to Arizona?
Oh, absolutely. We'll use Arizona, yeah.
I'm here inside Amazon's Austin, Texas chip lab, where it makes its own custom microchips to compete with those from Intel, Nvidia, and other giants. And it's actually a way for them to save money and boost performance because it's one of the biggest buyers of data center chips in the world.
This is the chip that's inside.
For nearly 30 years, Nvidia's chips have been coveted by gamers, shaping what's possible in graphics and dominating the entire market since it first popularized the term graphics processing unit with the GeForce 256. Now, its chips are powering something entirely different.
ChatGPT has started a very intense conversation.
He thinks it's the most revolutionary thing since the iPhone.
Venture capital interest in AI startups has skyrocketed.
All of us working in this field have been optimistic that at some point the broader world would understand the importance of this technology. And it's actually really exciting that that's starting to happen.
As the engine behind large language models like ChatGPT, Nvidia is finally reaping rewards for its investment in AI, even as other chip giants suffer in the shadow of U.S. China trade tensions and an ease in the chip shortage that's weakened demand. But the California-based chip designer relies on Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company to make nearly all its chips, leaving it vulnerable.
The biggest risk is really kind of U.S. China relations and the potential impact of TSMC. If I'm a shareholder in Nvidia, that's really the only thing that keeps me up at night.
This isn't the first time Nvidia has found itself teetering on the leading edge of an uncertain emerging market. It's neared bankruptcy a handful of times in its history when founder and CEO Jensen Huang bet the company on impossible-seeming ventures.
Every company makes mistakes, and I make a lot of them. And some of them puts the company in peril, especially in the beginning, because we were small and we're up against very, very large companies, and we're trying to invent this brand new technology.
We sat down with Huang at Nvidia's Silicon Valley headquarters to find out how he pulled off this latest reinvention and got a behind-the-scenes look at all the ways it powers far more than just gaming. Now one of the world's top 10 most valuable companies, Nvidia is one of the rare Silicon Valley giants that 30 years in still has its founder at the helm.
I delivered the first one of these inside an AI supercomputer to OpenAI when it was first created.
60-year-old Jensen Huang, a Fortune Business Person of the Year and one of Time's most influential people in 2021, immigrated to the U.S. from Taiwan as a kid and studied engineering at Oregon State and Stanford. In the early 90s, Huang met fellow engineers Chris Malachowski and Curtis Priam at Denny's, where they talked about dreams of enabling PCs with 3D graphics, the kind made popular by movies like Jurassic Park at the time.
If you go back 30 years, at the time the PC revolution was just starting, and there was quite a bit of debate about what is the future of computing and how should software be run. And there was a large camp, and rightfully so, that believed that CPU or general purpose software was the best way to go. And it was the best way to go for a long time. We felt, however, that there was a class of applications that wouldn't be possible without acceleration.
The friends launched Nvidia out of a condo in Fremont, California in 1993. The name was inspired by NV for next version and Nvidia, the Latin word for envy. They hoped to speed up computing so much everyone would be green with envy. At more than 80% of revenue, its primary business remains GPUs. Typically sold as cards that plug into a PC's motherboard, they accelerate, add computing power, to central processing units, CPUs, from companies like AMD and Intel.
They were one among tens of GPU makers at that time. They are the only ones, and them and AMD actually, who really survived because Nvidia worked very well with the software community. This is not a chip business. This is a business of figuring out things end to end.
But at the start, its future was far from guaranteed.
In the beginning, there weren't that many applications for it, frankly. And we smartly chose one particular combination that was a home run. It was computer graphics, and we applied it to video games.
Now, Nvidia is known for revolutionizing gaming and Hollywood with rapid rendering of visual effects. Nvidia designed its first high-performance graphics chip in 1997. Designed, not manufactured, because Huang was committed to making Nvidia a fabless chip company, keeping capital expenditure way down by outsourcing the extraordinary expense of making the chips to TSMC.
On behalf of all of us, you're my hero.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nvidia today wouldn't be here nor the other 1,000 fabless semiconductor companies wouldn't be here if not for the pioneering work that TSMC did.
In 1999, after laying off the majority of workers and nearly going bankrupt to do it, Nvidia released what it claims was the world's first official GPU, the GeForce 256. It was the first programmable graphics card that allowed custom shading and lighting effects. By 2000, Nvidia was the exclusive graphics provider for Microsoft's first Xbox.
Microsoft and the Xbox happened at exactly the time that we invented this thing called a programmable shader, and it defines how computer graphics is done today.
Nvidia went public in 1999, and its stock stayed largely flat until demand went through the roof during the pandemic. In 2006, it released a software toolkit called CUDA that would eventually propel it to the center of the AI boom. It's essentially a computing platform and programming model that changes how Nvidia GPUs work, from serial to parallel compute.
Parallel computing is, let me take a task and attack it all at the same time using much smaller machines, right? So it's the difference between having an army where you have one giant soldier who's able to do things very well, but one at a time, versus an army of thousands of soldiers who are able to take that problem, right, and do it in parallel. So it's a very different computing approach.
Nvidia's big steps haven't always been in the right direction. In the early 2010s, it made unsuccessful moves into smartphones with its Tegra line of processors.
They quickly realized that the smartphone market wasn't for them, so they exited from that.
In 2020, Nvidia closed a long-awaited $7 billion deal to acquire data center chip company Mellanox. But just last year, Nvidia had to abandon a $40 billion bid to acquire ARM, citing significant regulatory challenges. ARM is a major CPU company known for licensing its signature ARM architecture to Apple for iPhones and iPads, Amazon for Kindles, and many major car makers. Despite some setbacks, today Nvidia has 26,000 employees, a newly built Polygon-themed headquarters in Santa Clara, California, and billions of chips used for far more than just graphics. Think data centers, cloud computing, and most prominently, AI.
We're in every cloud made by every computer company, and then all of a sudden one day, a new application that wasn't possible before discovers you.
More than a decade ago, Nvidia's CUDA and GPUs were the engine behind AlexNet, what many consider AI's Big Bang moment. It was a new, incredibly accurate neural network that obliterated the competition during a prominent image recognition contest in 2012. Turns out the same parallel processing needed to create lifelike graphics is also ideal for deep learning, where a computer learns by itself rather than relying on a programmer's code.
We had the good wisdom to go put the whole company behind it. We saw early on, about a decade or so ago, that this way of doing software could change everything. And we changed the company from the bottom all the way to the top and sideways. Every chip that we made was focused on artificial intelligence.
Brian Catanzara was the first and only employee on NVIDIA's deep learning team 6 years ago. Now it's 50 people and growing.
For 10 years, Wall Street asked Nvidia, why are you making this investment? No one's using it. And they valued it at $0 in our market cap. And it wasn't until around 2016 that after, 10 years after CUDA came out, that all of a sudden people understood this is a dramatically different way of writing computer programs, and it has transformational speedups that then yield breakthrough results in artificial intelligence.
So what are some real-world applications for NVIDIA's AI? Healthcare is one big area. Think far faster drug discovery and DNA sequencing that takes hours instead of weeks.
We were able to achieve the Guinness World Record in a genomic sequencing technique to actually diagnose these patients and administer one of the patients in the trial to have a heart transplant, a 13-year-old boy who's thriving today as a result, and then also a 3-month-old baby that was having epileptic seizures, and to be able to prescribe an anti-seizure medication.
And then there's art powered by NVIDIA AI, like Rafiq Anadol's creations that cover entire buildings. And when crypto started to boom, NVIDIA's GPUs became the coveted tool for mining the digital currency.
Which is not really a recommended usage, but that has created problems because crypto mining has been a boom or bust cycle. So gaming cards, right, go out of stock, prices get bid up, and then when the crypto mining boom collapses, then there is a big crash, right, on the gaming side.
Although NVIDIA did create a simplified GPU made just for mining, it didn't stop crypto miners from buying up gaming GPUs, sending prices through the roof. And although that shortage is over, NVIDIA caused major sticker shock among some gamers last year by pricing its new 40 series GPUs far higher than the previous generation. Now there's too much supply, and the most recently reported quarterly gaming revenue was down 46% from the year before. But NVIDIA still beat expectations in its most recent earnings report thanks to the AI boom, as tech giants like Microsoft and Google fill their data centers with thousands of NVIDIA A100s, the engines used to train large language models like ChatGPT.
When we ship them, we don't ship them in packs of 1, we ship them in packs of 8.
With a suggested price of nearly $200,000, NVIDIA's DGX A100 server board has 8 Ampere GPUs that work together to enable things like the insanely fast and uncannily human-like responses of ChatGPT.
I have been trained on a massive dataset of text, which allows me to understand and generate text on a wide range of topics.
Companies scrambling to compete in generative AI are publicly boasting about how many NVIDIA A100s they have. Microsoft, for example, trained ChatGPT with 10,000.
It's very easy to use their products and add more computing capacity. And once you add that computing capacity is basically the currency of the valley right now.
And the next generation up from Ampere, Hopper, has already started to ship. Some uses for generative AI are real-time translation and instant text-to-image renderings. But this is also the tech behind eerily convincing, and some say dangerous, deepfake videos, text, and audio.
Are there any ways that NVIDIA is sort of protecting against some of these bigger fears that people have, or building in safeguards?
Yes, I think the safeguards that we're building as an industry about how AI is going to be used are extraordinarily important. We're trying to find ways of authenticating content so that we can know if a video was actually created in the real world or virtually, similarly for text and audio.
But being at the center of the generative AI boom doesn't make NVIDIA immune to wider market concerns. In October, the U.S. introduced sweeping new rules that banned exports of leading-edge AI chips to China, including NVIDIA's A100.
About a quarter of your revenue comes from mainland China. How do you calm investor fears over the new export controls?
Well, NVIDIA's technology is export controlled. It's a reflection of the importance of the technology that we make. The first thing that we have to do is comply with the regulations. And it was a turbulent, month or so as the company went upside down to re-engineer all of our products so that it's compliant with the regulation and yet still be able to serve the commercial customers that we have in China. We're able to serve our customers in China with the regulated parts and delightfully support them.
But perhaps an even bigger geopolitical risk for NVIDIA is its dependence on TSMC in Taiwan.
There's two issues. One, will China take over the island of Taiwan at some point? And two, is there a viable, competitor to TSMC? And as of right now, Intel is trying aggressively to get there. And, their goal is by 2025, and we will see. And this is not just an Nvidia risk. This is a risk for AMD, for Qualcomm, even for Intel.
This is a big reason why the U.S. passed the CHIPS Act last summer, which sets aside $52 billion to incentivize chip companies to manufacture on U.S. soil. Now, TSMC is spending $40 billion to build 2 chip fabrication plants, fabs, in Arizona.
The fact of the matter is TSMC is a really important company, and the world doesn't have more than one of them. It is imperative upon ourselves and them for them to also invest in diversity and redundancy. And
will you be moving any of your manufacturing to Arizona?
oh, absolutely, we'll use Arizona, yeah.
And then there's the chip shortage. As it largely comes to a close and supply catches up with demand, some types of chips are experiencing a price slump. But for Nvidia, the chatbot boom means demand for its AI chips continues to grow, at least for now.
See, the biggest question for them is how do they stay ahead? Because their customers can be their competitors also. Microsoft can try and design these things internally. Amazon and Google are already designing these things internally.
Tesla and Apple are designing their own custom chips too. But Jensen says competition is a net good.
The amount of power that the world needs in the data center will grow. And you can see in the recent trends, it's growing very quickly. And that's a real issue for the world.
While AI and ChatGPT have been generating lots of buzz for Nvidia, it's far from Huang's only focus.
And we take that model and we put it into this computer, and that's a self-driving car. And we take that computer and we put it into here, and that's a little robot computer.
Like the kind that's used at Amazon.
That's right.
Amazon and others use Nvidia to power robots in their warehouses and to create digital twins of the massive spaces and run simulation to optimize the flow of millions of packages each day. Driving units like these in Nvidia's robotics lab are powered by the Tegra chips that were once a flop in mobile phones. Now they're used to power the world's biggest e-commerce operations. Nvidia's Tegra chips were also used in Tesla Model 3s from 2016 to 2019. Now Tesla uses its own chips, but Nvidia is making autonomous driving tech for other car makers like Mercedes-Benz.
So we call it Nvidia Drive, and basically Nvidia Drive's a scalable platform, whether you want to use it for simple ADAS, assisted driving, for your emergency braking warning, pre-collision warning, or just holding the lane for cruise control, all the way up to a robotaxi where it is doing everything, driving anywhere in any condition, any type of weather.
Nvidia is also trying to compete in a totally different arena, releasing its own data center's CPU, Grace.
What do you say to gamers who wish you had kept focus entirely on the core business of gaming?
Well, if not for all of our work in physics simulation, if not for all of our research in artificial intelligence, what we did recently with GeForce RTX would not have been possible.
Released in 2018, RTX is Nvidia's next big move in graphics, with a new technology called ray tracing.
For us to take computer graphics and video games to the next level, we had to reinvent and disrupt ourselves, basically simulating the pathways of light and simulate everything with generative AI. And so we compute one pixel and we imagine with AI the other 7. It's really quite amazing. Imagine a jigsaw puzzle, and we gave you 1 out of 8 pieces, and somehow the AI filled in the rest.
Ray tracing is used in nearly 300 games now, like Cyberpunk 2077, Fortnite, and Minecraft. And Nvidia GeForce GPUs in the cloud allow full-quality streaming of 1,500 plus games to nearly any PC. It's also part of what enables simulations, modeling of how objects would behave in real-world situations. Think climate forecasting, or autonomous drive tech that's informed by millions of miles of virtual roads. It's all part of what Nvidia calls the Omniverse, what Huang points to as the company's next big bet.
We have 700 plus customers who are trying it now, from car industry to logistics warehouse to wind turbine plants. And so I'm really excited about the progress there. And it represents probably the single greatest container of all of NVIDIA's technology: computer graphics, artificial intelligence, robotics, and physics simulation, all into one. I have great hopes for it.
Samsung is a brand name that's everywhere, in more than 100 million US households. Android phones, TVs, refrigerators, microwaves, and unconventional displays.
So the 13-inch display can be as big as 17-inch. This is the future of display.
But there's a huge, lesser-known side of Samsung that lately has made it one of the world's most important and valuable companies. It's not just making devices, it's making the chips that power them.
People probably don't know that we've led memory for 3 decades.
Samsung is the leader in memory chips. Think long and short-term data storage.
They are the titan. They have, nearly 50% share in both DRAM and NAND.
And it's the world's second biggest maker of the most advanced logic chips, the kind in Teslas, supercomputers, AI, smartphones, and so much more. We recently went inside Samsung's Austin chip-making factory, or fab, in the first in-depth tour ever given to a U.S. journalist. And how many chips are you pumping out every day here?
A lot.
Now, it's gunning to overtake the massive advanced chip leader, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company.
We do not settle, to be number 2.
It ended 2022 with $245 billion in annual revenue. For context, that's $47 billion more than Microsoft. But since then, prices for memory chips have taken a dive, and they're expected to fall up to 23% more in Q2 2023. In April, Samsung reported dismal earnings for the first quarter of 2023, with profit plunging 95% to its lowest level since 2009. In response, the company cut production of memory chips. But it doubled down on Foundry, the side of its business that makes custom logic chips for outside customers. It's building a $228 billion megacluster of 5 new fabs in its home country of South Korea, scheduled to come online in 2042. And in the US, where the $52 billion CHIPS Act aims to reshore chip manufacturing, Samsung's building a huge $17 billion fab in Taylor, Texas, promising to make its first advanced chips in the US next year.
What's going on is just remarkable. It's enormous.
I really want to be a bedrock for U.S. industry.
CNBC got a rare interview with the head of Samsung's U.S. chip business, Jensen Huang, and brings you inside its Texas sites to find out how the Korean powerhouse plans to dominate not only devices, but U.S. chip making. Samsung dates back 85 years to 1938, when founder Lee Byung-chul started it as a trading company for exporting fruit, vegetables, and fish in Korea.
His vision for our company to be, eternal, strong, and powerful. So he chose the name Samsung, which literally means 3 stars.
To survive 2 major wars, it diversified into sugar refining, construction, textiles, insurance, retail, and it remains a multifaceted business to this day. Samsung Rising author Jeffrey Kane has been covering the company from Korea and the US for over a decade.
If you had transported yourself back into time 60, 70, or 80 years ago and asked the average person about Samsung, they just shrug their shoulders and say, I guess it's a little grocery store in Korea that no one's really ever heard of.
Samsung Electronics, the division it's known for most, was established in 1969. The first Samsung TV came out in 1972. And just 2 years later, Lee bought Hankook Semiconductor in a bold move toward making it the vertically integrated consumer electronic giant it is today.
The Lee family is, you could call it, the most powerful family in South Korea, one of the most powerful families in tech.
Samsung's first U.S. offices opened in New Jersey in 1978, and by 1980, Samsung Semiconductor was born with a fab in Korea. By the early 80s, it was making 64-kilobyte DRAM memory and had a new U.S. office in Silicon Valley. Lee's son took over after his father's death in 1987, and its first mobile phone came a year later. Now, Samsung is the world's biggest smartphone provider, often neck and neck with Apple. Just a decade after making its first memory chip, Samsung gained international notoriety with the world's first 64-megabit DRAM chip in 1992, placing it squarely at first place in memory, where it remains today.
Its presence is so ubiquitous in South Korea that they call their country the Republic of Samsung.
In 1996, Samsung broke ground on its big fab in Austin, and it opened another one there in 2007. It got a new U.S. headquarters building in Silicon Valley in 2015, designed to look like a 3-layer stack of flash memory chips.
This is based on 3 nanometer, which is the most advanced technology we have, and this price is almost same as mid-size car.
Han has been with Samsung for more than 3 decades. While its primary chip manufacturing still happens in South Korea, it of course makes them in Texas as well as China. Besides devices, the biggest part of its revenue, some 57%, comes from memory. But as shoppers cut back amid rising inflation, demand has weakened sharply, especially for memory chips. That comes in the footsteps of a pandemic that involved peaking demand and supply chain disruptions, eventually culminating in a global chip shortage.
It was really painful. When you look at your customers asking, more chips, but there's no way you can provide that, it was so painful.
But the new reality is far less demand. Smaller memory chip makers like SK Hynix and Micron cut production in late 2022. Samsung waited until April 2023 to do the same.
We are now going through very worse slump in terms of semiconductor demand. And we believe that the market will rebound possibly by end of this year.
Micron and SK Hynix started laying off folks. They've cut their spending on new fabs. Samsung is pushing forward though, and they're not cutting back on spending despite it being unprofitable today.
Instead, Samsung is shifting focus to foundry, making computing chips designed by fabless chip companies. A big difference between Samsung and top foundry player TSMC is that Samsung makes its own chip designs for its own products, as well as for thousands of others.
This includes Tesla, Sony, NXP, ST Microelectronics, Intel, soon AMD, IBM is also a customer. Qualcomm is, of course, their biggest customer, but they're moving significantly towards TSMC.
Samsung stock has been trending down since the peak of the chip shortage in 2021, although it just hit a 52-week high despite dismal Q1 profits. This may be a reaction to the latest move in the geopolitical chip war between China and the U.S. In May, China banned products from U.S. memory chip maker Micron, which in turn could boost demand for Samsung. And Morgan Stanley recently named Samsung a top pick. In October, the U.S. did place big restrictions on chip companies exporting their most advanced tech to China. But for now, Samsung and SK Hynix were given a one-year waiver to operate their existing chip fabs in China.
The Department of Commerce really crafted these rules to make sure that those existing fabs aren't impacted, but Samsung and SK Hynix don't build new fabs.
When it comes to foundry, Samsung is one of only 3 companies in the world capable of manufacturing the world's most advanced chips, ranking second between TSMC and Intel. And with mounting U.S. China Taiwan tensions, the U.S. is eager to entice all 3 to make more chips on American soil. Good motivation for President Biden's visit to Samsung in South Korea on his first presidential trip to Asia last year.
By uniting our skills and our technological know-how, it allows the production of chips that are critical to both our countries and are essential sectors of our global economy.
The first factory that I started working in, we did 4-inch wafer fabrication. I moved on to 5, I've done 6. Our factory here started at 8.
John Taylor joined Samsung 26 years ago as part of the team at the Austin fab that broke ground in 1996. Now he heads up the whole Austin site.
Everything is supposed to be bigger and better in Texas.
Since first coming to the U.S. 45 years ago, Samsung says it's invested $47 billion here and has some 20,000 U.S. employees. Now it's expanding to a 17,000-person Texas city about 30 miles north of Austin.
Bringing Taylor on board is just going to increase their ability to source their chips domestically and not have to go into areas of the world where they may have some discomfort.
Construction began here at Taylor, Texas less than a year ago, and Samsung says it's on track to be operational by the end of 2024. It's a 1,200-acre, $17 billion site, and it's going to be bigger than Samsung's Austin fab. It's also going to be producing the most advanced chips that Samsung makes in the U.S.
Samsung says this big new growth in the U.S. comes down to customer demand, largely due to the geopolitical risks swirling around Taiwan, where more than 90% of advanced chips are currently made.
Chips such as the current self-driving chip in the Tesla cars is made in their Austin campus. But that foundry in Austin currently is for 14 nanometer and older technologies, right? So it's not the leading edge technologies yet. Samsung's 7 nanometer, 5 nanometer, 3 nanometer, that is all in South Korea.
Over the last 30-plus years, the U.S. share of global chip production has plummeted from 37% to just 12%. That's because it costs at least 20% more to build and operate a new fab in the U.S. than in Asia. Labor is cheaper there, the supply chain is more accessible, and government incentives are far greater. The CHIPS Act aims to change that, setting aside $52 billion for companies like Samsung to manufacture in the U.S.
The CHIPS Act is helping us to overcome the differences in construction costs that we get out of Asia versus the United States. And there definitely is a difference.
That's also why it's Samsung's goal to bring more of that supply chain to the U.S. Of the $17 billion total price tag for Samsung's Taylor, Texas fab, $11 billion is going to machinery and equipment, like the $200 million EUV lithography machines made by ASML, the only devices in the world that can etch with enough precision for the most advanced chips, and the massive machines made by Applied Materials, the world's next biggest microchip equipment company.
Every chip in the world made goes through our machines, few times at least. So inside this machine, you are building billions and billions of transistors in a small chip, under 100 kilometers of wiring.
Applied Materials is a key Samsung supplier already based in the U.S., and it's growing U.S. operations at the same time as Samsung, with the biggest semiconductor project Silicon Valley has seen in 30-plus years.
Why Santa Clara? This is where the collaboration happens between our customers, leading universities, and our partners.
But all this growth for Samsung in the U.S. hasn't come without concerns. First, there's water. About 80% of Texas remains in drought. In 2021, Samsung used about 38 billion gallons of water to make its chips.
Where will that water come from here, especially in periods of drought?
So we have the Texas Water Board that's working on that, and legislation we're working on this session to make sure that with a growing population in Texas, we will be able to provide for the water needs, not just of businesses, but also for our growing population.
Now what you see here are the cooling towers behind us. And we've got a very aggressive goal this year in Austin, on our Austin campus. We want to reuse over 1 billion gallons of water this year. And we take our sustainability goals very seriously. And even on our Taylor project, which we have starting up, our goals there are to reclaim over 75% of our water.
And then there's power. Texas has a uniquely independent grid, largely cut off from borrowing power across state lines. In 2021, that grid failed during an extreme winter storm, leaving millions of Texans without power and causing at least 57 deaths.
So electricity is the lifeblood of a semiconductor fab in a sense, right? There have been multiple instances where electricity has gone out and companies have had to scrap months of production.
Samsung told CNBC its Taylor fab will mark its first use of advanced chip etching EUV machines in the US. But each of those machines is rated to consume about 1 megawatt of electricity. That's 10% more than the previous generation. One study showed Samsung used more than 20% of South Korea's entire solar and wind power capacity in 2020.
I already signed 12 laws to make the power grid more reliable, more resilient, and more secure. And so we can definitely assure any business moving here, they will have access to the power they need, but also at a low cost.
U.S. expansion aside, Samsung has also faced major scandals at home in South Korea. Corruption charges have kept Samsung's founding Lee family in the headlines for decades.
This is real life succession. That is what Samsung is. It's got the whole shebang. It's got the shareholder battles, the generational intrigue, the spying.
The most recent member of Samsung's founding family to lead, J.Y. Lee, served over a year in prison for bribery and was officially pardoned in August. He took the helm as executive chairman in October.
Every major company out there, Apple, they have to bend the knee to Samsung. They have to get their chips, their displays. This is a company that everybody has to go through at some point to get what they need because they're so influential. And they're run by a convicted criminal.
And then there's the big 7-year legal battle between Samsung and Apple.
Samsung was arguing that its phones were simply using a form factor and a design that would be generic, this rectangle with rounded circles. Apple said that they copied them. So they settled, Apple got a payment from Samsung, so Apple technically won. But when you add up all the legal costs, all the fighting, all those years, it was just a neutral 0-on-0 for both sides.
To this day, it remains a tricky relationship.
They're supplying to Apple, but they're also competing with Apple. And on the flip side, Apple is buying their chips, but then competing with their smartphones. That creates a really weird situation.
At the end of the day, controversies haven't impeded Samsung's forward momentum. In 2022, it announced an ambitious new roadmap that would, in theory, put it ahead of the far bigger market leader.
So is the ultimate goal to catch TSMC, to surpass TSMC?
One of the things I love about Samsung since I joined is Samsung is never satisfied with number two as a business, as a company. We're very aggressive.
Now, Samsung's goal is to triple its capacity of leading-edge manufacturing and to make industry-leading 2nm chips by 2025 and 1.4 nanometer by 2027.
I mean, if Samsung hits their targets, they'll leapfrog ahead of TSMC, but that's a big if. TSMC is the only one that the industry trusts to hit their roadmap.
As geopolitical tensions mount around China and Taiwan, customers are eager for a second source for advanced chips beyond TSMC. Intel, the next biggest advanced chip maker, is also adding manufacturing outside Asia, building big new fabs in Ohio and Europe.
We can't be relied upon hostile countries for our everyday needs. And so the United States of America needs to make sure that we are manufacturing everything that we need. We learned that during the time of COVID, and we shall not make that mistake again.
But as Samsung races into leading-edge chips, will it lose focus on legacy chips? The kind that saw the biggest shortages during the pandemic, slowing down production of everything from cars to game consoles.
This factory that we're in right now is a mature node factory, or some people would call that legacy. But there's no pulling back here. It's really full steam ahead.
But now the AI boom means entirely different chips, namely GPUs from Nvidia, have taken center stage. Nvidia relies primarily on TSMC to make its chips, giving shares of the Taiwanese giant a boost.
There are more and more people around the world who can make memory chips, and to stay ahead of the game, you've got to get into the newer, some of the newer logic technologies.
Samsung's decision to pull back on memory and focus more on foundry, which is all it makes in Austin now, means more custom chips for customers, including perhaps those driving the large language model craze.
They're going to be diving deeper into the logic chip segment, so the AI chips, the future applications for semiconductor technology. I think that this would place them more in a segment with Nvidia.
But the question remains, is this truly the future for Samsung chips? And can it be achieved in Texas, where Taylor says making 3nm chips in 2024 is only the start?
We currently just have one fab announced there, but plenty of room for more. And really the what next is looking at what the market needs, what our customers are asking for, and being ready to deliver, and hopefully right out of Taylor, Texas, with more factories and more investment there.
In an unmarked office building in Austin, Texas.
Come on in.
There are two small rooms where a handful of employees peer into microscopes, soldering irons or tiny tweezers in hand. They're designing two types of microchips made to power data centers, and more recently, the AI boom.
When we get this, what do? We test it. First thing that we do, we test it.
But these chips aren't coming from Nvidia, AMD, or any of the chip companies that have been hitting headlines and market milestones since ChatGPT burst on the scene late last year.
I'm here inside Amazon's Austin, Texas chip lab, where it makes its own custom microchips to compete with those from Intel, Nvidia, and other giants. And it's actually a way for them to save money and boost performance because it's one of the biggest buyers of data center chips in the world. AWS CEO Adam Selipsky told CNBC that the chips that we saw here today are powering large language models and more for the AI boom.
The entire world would like more chips for doing generative AI. And whether that's GPUs or whether that's Amazon's own chips that we're designing, I think that we're in a better position than anybody else on Earth to supply the capacity that our customers collectively are going to want.
Amazon Web Services is the world's biggest cloud computing provider and the most profitable arm of the retail giant, with an operating income of $5.4 billion in Q2. Although that number has been down year over year for 3 quarters in a row, AWS still accounted for 70% of Amazon's overall $7.7 billion Q2 operating profit, giving it the cash it needs for the huge undertaking that is custom silicon, and a growing portfolio of developer tools that could, eventually, propel Amazon to the center of all the AI buzz.
Many of our AWS customers have terabytes or petabytes or exabytes of data already stored on AWS, and they know that that data is going to help them customize the models that they're using to power their generative AI applications.
And yet others have acted faster and invested more to capture business from the generative AI boom. Think Microsoft's reported $13 billion investment in ChatGPT maker OpenAI, and Google's chatbot Bard, followed by its $300 million investment in OpenAI rival Anthropic. AWS's profit margins have historically been far higher than those at Google Cloud, but those margins have been narrowing. And although AWS's growth is still impressive, that's happening at a slower pace too.
Amazon is not used to chasing markets. Amazon is used to creating markets. And I think for the first time in a long time, they're finding themselves on the back foot, and they are working to play catch up.
CNBC sat down with top AWS executives and analysts to ask about custom chips and how it plans to make strides in generative AI to catch Google and Microsoft, and perhaps give a needed boost to AWS too.
We end up with a packaged part like this, right? And this is an actual machine learning accelerator that was designed, and you can see Annapurna Labs on it.
In 2015, Amazon bought Israeli startup Annapurna Labs to accelerate its dive into the chip business. In July, we went to AWS's Annapurna location in Austin for an exclusive look at the chip design process with lab director Rami Sinno. AWS also designs chips in Silicon Valley, Canada, and at a larger lab in Israel, then sends them off to be made by chip manufacturers like TSMC in Taiwan. AWS quietly started production of custom silicon back in 2013 with a piece of specialized hardware called Nitro, now the highest volume AWS chip, with more than 20 million in use in every AWS server. Then at AWS's big annual customer conference, reInvent, in 2018, Amazon launched its ARM-based server chip, Graviton, to rival x86 CPUs from giants like AMD and Intel.
It's probably high single digit to maybe 10% of total server sales are ARM, and a good chunk of those are going to be Amazon. So on the CPU side, they've done quite well.
We're into our third generation of our Graviton chip. That provides acceleration in terms of speed and cost efficiency and power for very general kind of web-based workloads.
After announcing Graviton in 2018, AWS announced its first AI-focused chips. VP of Product Matt Wood showed us the two AI chips it has today.
This big one here is called Trainium, and this small one here is called Inferentia.
Inferentia, Amazon's first AI chip, launched in 2019.
Which we're on our second generation of, which allows customers to deliver very, very low cost, high throughput, low latency machine learning inference, which is all the predictions of when you type in a prompt into your generative AI model, that's where all that gets processed to give you the response. With Inferentia, you can get about 4 times more throughput and 10 times lower latency using Inferentia than anything else available on AWS today.
Trainium came on the market in 2021.
All right, so this is a packaged part, and then let me show you the other side. What you see here is all the interfaces.
Machine learning breaks down into these 2 different stages. So you train the machine learning models, and then you run inference against those trained models. And so we see a lot of customers that are interested in training their own machine learning models and their own generative AI models. And so that's where Trainium really, really helps. Trainium provides about 50% improvement in terms of price performance relative to any other way of training machine learning models on AWS.
But for now, Nvidia's GPUs are still king when it comes to training LLMs. AWS itself just launched new AI acceleration hardware powered by Nvidia H100s.
Accelerating performance by up to 6x and reducing training costs by up to 40% as compared to EC2 P4 instances.
NVIDIA chips have a massive software ecosystem that's been built up around them over the last 15 years that nobody else has. The big winner from AI right now is NVIDIA. That seems clear.
Still, Amazon is not the only non-chip giant getting into custom silicon. Apple has its M series of chips. And a couple years before Amazon had AI chips, Google launched its own Cloud Tensor Processing Units, or TPUs.
Nobody's at the same scale as Google. Google's been deploying this stuff for 8 years. My assumption is all of the hyperscalers, whether they've announced it or not, are all working on their own accelerators. And many are also working on their own CPUs as well.
But when it comes to custom chips, Microsoft is lagging behind Amazon and Google. Microsoft has yet to announce the Athena AI chip it's been working on, reportedly in partnership with AMD.
I think the true differentiation is the technical capabilities that they're bringing to bear. Because guess what? Microsoft does not have Trainium or Inferentia.
Generative AI is the current craze, but Amazon was building out a broader AI infrastructure for machine learning with dozens of services long before it made chips or used them to train LLMs.
Late 1990s, we were the first one to actually leverage machine learning-based technologies to reinvent recommendation engines. And we leveraged machine learning to do things like a better product search, and then automating, leveraging robotics and computer vision in our Amazon FCs, our fulfillment centers, to help products ship faster, to actually reinventing completely new customer experiences with things like Amazon Alexa.
But when OpenAI launched ChatGPT in November 2022, Microsoft was suddenly dominating the AI headlines, followed by Google's Bard in February. 2 months later, Amazon announced its own large language model called Titan, and Bedrock, a cloud service to help developers enhance software using generative AI.
I think ChatGPT and Microsoft rollout of their initiatives was so fast, so aggressive, so quick. It caught a lot of the market participants flat-footed. Amazon is trying to educate the market in order to close the gap. But frankly speaking, it's going to take a couple of months.
Let's rewind the clock even before ChatGPT. It's not like after that happened, suddenly we hurried and came up with a plan, because you can't engineer a chip in that quick a time. If anything, it actually accelerated some of the customer conversation and their keenness to actually move forward with generative AI deployments.
Meta also recently announced its own LLM, Llama 2. The open-source ChatGPT rival is available on Microsoft's Azure cloud platform. Now, a leaked internal email shows Amazon CEO Andy Jassy is directly overseeing a new central team that's building out expansive large language models. But so far, AWS has focused on tools instead of building a ChatGPT competitor.
So if you look at the Bedrock strategy that they are trying to focus on, they are betting the farm on the fact that enterprises might not necessarily be building out their own GPT models.
Bedrock gives AWS customers access to LLMs made by Anthropic, Stability AI, AI21, and Amazon's own Titan.
Titan is actually a family of foundational models. We have text-based models, which are great for generative text, so creating marketing copy and advertising, chatbots, those sorts of things. And then we have an embedding model, which is great for personalization and ranking, those sorts of use cases.
Amazon says its AI products are being used by numerous customers, like Philips, 3M, Old Mutual, and HSBC. In the Q2 earnings call, it said a very significant amount of AWS business is now driven by AI and the 20-plus machine learning services it offers.
We don't believe that one model is going to rule the world, per se, and we want our customers to have the state-of-the-art models from multiple providers, because they are going to pick the right tool for the right job.
One of Amazon's new AI offerings is AWS Health Scribe, a service unveiled in July to help doctors automatically draft patient visit summaries and more. Another big tool in the AWS AI stack is Code Whisperer.
Code Whisperer generates code recommendations from natural language prompts based on contextual information. Participants who use Code Whisperer were 27% more likely to complete their task successfully, and they did it 57% faster on average.
Last year, Microsoft also reported productivity boosts from its coding companion, GitHub Copilot. And then there's SageMaker, Amazon's machine learning hub that offers algorithms, models, and more.
Autodesk, for instance, they were able to leverage generative AI foundational models to design a bulkhead of an aircraft. In one example, it was 45% lighter for a particular carrier.
In June, AWS also announced a $100 million Generative AI Innovation Center.
We have so many customers who are saying, I want to do generative AI, but they don't all necessarily know what that means for them in the context of their own businesses. And so we're going to bring in solutions architects and engineers and strategists and data scientists to work with them one-on-one.
When companies are choosing between Amazon, Google, and Microsoft for their generative AI needs, some may choose Bedrock because they're already familiar with AWS, where they run other applications and store a ton of data.
If you took the data that we have in Amazon S3 that's stored on devices like this, and you stacked them up, one on top of another, it would take you all the way to the International Space Station and almost all the way back, and that is a lot of data.
At the end of the day, Amazon does not need to win headlines. Amazon already has a really strong cloud install base. All they need to do is to figure out how to enable their existing customers to expand into value creation motions using generative AI.
So how many AWS customers are actually using it for machine learning?
We have over 100,000 customers today that are using machine learning on AWS, many of which have standardized on our machine learning service, which is called SageMaker, to build, train, and deploy their own custom models.
But in reality, that's not a big percentage of AWS's millions of customers. Although most aren't tapping into it for AI yet, that could change.
What we are not seeing is enterprises saying, oh, wait a minute, Microsoft is so ahead in generative AI, let's just go out and let's switch our infrastructure strategies, migrate everything to Microsoft. That is not happening, because at the end of the day, even if you're trying to create a chatbot, if you're already an Amazon customer, chances are you're likely going to explore Amazon ecosystems quite extensively.
How quickly can these companies move to develop these generative AI applications is driven by starting first on the data they have in AWS and using compute and machine learning tools that we provide. Imagine you're cooking dinner and you're using a new recipe. It is a lot faster to start with ingredients that you already know, that have been cut and prepared, to go ahead and put together the recipe than if you have to research all the ingredients, get familiar with them, and then learn how you're going to put them together and cook with them, right? That's what AWS customers are doing. They have all the different ingredients that they're familiar with and they know how to use, and whether that's storage or a compute, or it's machine learning tools like Amazon SageMaker and Amazon Bedrock, and they're putting it together that much faster.
And as generative AI continues to accelerate, all the big players are scrambling to establish how to use these tools responsibly and securely.
I can't tell you how many Fortune 500 companies I've talked to who have banned ChatGPT. So with our approach to generative AI and our Bedrock service, anything you do, any model you use through Bedrock will be in your own isolated virtual private cloud environment. It'll be encrypted. It'll have the same AWS access controls.
Solipsky joined 6 other AI players at the White House in July to sign pledges to ensure that AI tools are secure.
There are open problems that still need to be solved, especially when you're trying to deal with highly regulated industries in financial services, healthcare, and beyond. We still do not have any well thought out regulatory guardrails around data protection, private information protection, and responsible AI capabilities in the space.
There's also national security concerns. The Biden administration has proposed new rules that would require U.S. cloud providers like Amazon and Microsoft to seek government permission before providing China with cloud computing services using AI chips. But for now, there's no slowdown in sight for the development of new generative AI applications, or the chips needed to power them, and that race is just beginning.
So let's say that we're 3 steps into a race and we start asking, well, who's ahead, who's behind, how do the runners look? But then you look up and you realize that it's a 10K race. And then you realize it's the wrong question to ask. Well, who's where 3 steps into the race? The real question is, what's going to happen at the end of the 10K race? In this case, we're just at the very dawn of generative AI.
Past a small lobby, through a plain set of double doors,
Welcome to one of our chip labs.
there's a simple room filled with a couple hundred machines, blinking lights, a handful of engineers in lab coats, and a bunch of postage stamp-sized chips being put through rigorous testing.
Our goal is to be able to find bugs, manufacturing issues, design issues. We want to find them so that we can fix them and address them before we ship our chips into our systems.
Apple has enjoyed soaring valuation for years thanks to its forward-facing consumer products: MacBook, iPhone, Apple Watch, AirPods. But under the hood, it's also designing its own custom silicon that powers them all.
Mac transition is a proud moment. When we started scaling our chips to iPad and watches, proud moment. Building chips for the AirPods that you couldn't ship otherwise, proud moment.
Apple first debuted its own semiconductors in iPhones in 2010. As of June this year, all new Mac computers are powered by Apple's own silicon too, ending the company's 15-plus years of reliance on Intel.
I think one of the most, if not the most profound change at Apple, certainly in our products over the last 20 years, is how we now do so many of those technologies in-house.
But Apple isn't immune to industry risks. All its most advanced silicon is manufactured by one player, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. Smartphones are just recovering from a deep sales slump, and competitors like Microsoft are making big leaps in generative AI.
It's doable on Apple's last year chip, even more capable on this year chip with M3, but the software has got to catch up with that so the developers take advantage and write, again, tomorrow's AI software on Apple Silicon.
CNBC went to the company's California headquarters, where we were the first journalists allowed to film inside an Apple chip lab, and got a rare chance to talk with the head of Silicon about how it broke into the incredibly expensive, complex business of processors, kicking off a trend of non-chip companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and Tesla now rushing to do the same. Apple launched the first iPhone in June 2007 with a 90-nanometer processor inside made by Samsung. In 2008, Johnny Srouji came on board after stints at IBM and Intel.
I came to Apple with the purpose of building our own silicon for the iPhone. It was a very small team at the time, about 40 to 50 engineers, and since then we have grown the team immensely.
A month after Srouji joined, Apple bought a 150-person chip startup PA Semiconductor for $278 million.
They're going to start doing their own chips. That was the immediate takeaway when they bought PA Semi. Just, I think, knowing the culture of Apple, their inherent design focus to control as much of the stack.
Indeed, 2 years later, Apple launched its first custom chip, the A4, in the original iPad and the iPhone 4.
And we built what we call the unified memory architecture that is scalable across products. We built an architecture that you start with the iPhone, but then we scaled it to the iPad, and then to the watch, and eventually to the Mac.
Now, Apple's Silicon team has scaled to thousands of engineers, working across chip labs in places like Israel, Germany, Austria, the UK, Japan, and the US, in Austin, San Diego, and Silicon Valley, where we were the first journalists to ever film inside one.
On either side of me, there's about 70 machines testing chips, and these are the M3 series that are going in the new MacBooks, as well as the A series chips that end up in iPhone 15s. And these machines in particular are testing them for extreme temperatures, high heat, low temperatures, things like that.
Our board holders, we've kind of color-coded them. And what that does is that makes it easier for our engineers and the technicians to just be able to spot, oh, I'm looking for an M3 validation board.
The primary type of chips Apple is developing here are known as systems on a chip, or SoCs.
It is the silicon and all of the blocks that go onto that silicon. So there's CPU, there's GPU, there's DSP, there's accelerators, and in Apple's case, there's also an NPU that runs the neural engines.
Apple's first SoC was the A series, which has advanced from the A4 in 2010 to the A17 Pro announced in September. It's the central processor in iPhones, as well as some iPads, Apple TVs, and HomePod. Its other major SoC is the M series, now powering all new Macs and more advanced iPads. First released in 2020, it's now up to the M3 Max. The S series is a smaller System in Package, or SIP, for Apple Watch, first launched in 2015. H and W are even smaller chips used in AirPods. U chips allow communication between Apple devices. And the newest chip, the R1, is for Apple's Vision Pro headset, processing input and streaming images to the display within 12 milliseconds.
We get to design the chips ahead of time, working with our partners from John's team and software and OS, to exactly and precisely build chips that are going to be targeted for those products, and only for those products.
The H2 inside the second-gen AirPods Pro, for instance, enables better noise cancellation. Inside the new Series 9 Apple Watch, the S9 enables unusual capabilities like double tap. On the iPhone side, the A11 Bionic in 2017 was a major milestone because it had the first Apple Neural Engine, a dedicated part of the SoC for performing AI tasks totally on device.
That was when we first started looking at, wow, how do we bring this advanced intelligence into things like our camera pipeline? So things in iOS 17 today, like being able to lift the subject from a photo.
Now leading marketing for the iPhone, Kyan Drance has been with Apple for more than 15 years. She says the latest A17 Pro is another major leap forward, enabling big changes to features like computational photography.
You can take 7 different shots, all from the same location. This is a macro shot. And then you've got the ultra-wide lens at 13 millimeters. With iPhone 15 Pro Max, you can go all the way up to 5x optical zoom.
The A17 Pro's new GPU architecture also enables advanced rendering for gaming on the iPhone 15 Pro.
It was actually the biggest redesign in GPU architecture in Apple Silicon history. So we have hardware accelerated ray tracing for the first time, and we have mesh shading acceleration, which allows game developers to create some really stunning visual effects.
Now, for the first time, some big games are coming out with iPhone native versions. Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed Mirage, The Division Resurgence, and Capcom's Resident Evil 4. Apple says the A17 Pro is the first 3-nanometer chip to ship at high volume.
The reason we use 3 nanometer is it gives us the ability to pack more transistors in a given dimension that is important for the product, and much better power efficiency. We're leading, even though we're not a chip company, we are leading the industry for a reason.
Apple's leap to 3 nanometer continued with the M3 chips for Macs announced in October. These are the main chips CNBC saw being tested in Cupertino.
We've got one of those M3s in this thermal station. We have a socket, and then the chip is in there. And then the thermal actuator is kind of applying heat or cold directly on the package of the SoC.
The M3 line enables new features like 22-hour battery life and, like the A17 Pro, boosted graphics performance.
It's early days. We have a lot of work to do, but I think there's so many Macs now. Pretty much all Macs are capable of running AAA titles, which is not what it was like 5 years ago.
Now Apple's hardware chief, John Turnus, has been with the company for 22 years.
When I started, the way we tended to make products is we were using technologies from other companies, and we were effectively building the product around that. We had we've always had an incredible design team, and we made these beautiful products, but they were constrained by what was available.
In a major shift for the semi industry, Apple turned away from using Intel's PC processors in 2020, switching to its own M1 chip inside the MacBook Air and other Macs.
It was almost like the laws of physics had changed. Like all of a sudden, we could build a MacBook Air that's incredibly thin and light, has no fan, 18 hours of battery life, and outperformed the MacBook Pro that we had just been shipping. And we just launched a MacBook Pro with M3 Max that is 11 times faster than the fastest Intel MacBook Pro we were making, and we were shipping that just 2 years ago.
Intel processors are based on x86 architecture, the traditional choice for PC makers because a lot of software is developed for it. But Apple bases its processors on rival ARM architecture, known for using less power, helping laptop batteries last longer. The M1 was a proving point for ARM-based processors in high-end PCs, with others like Qualcomm, AMD, and Nvidia now developing ARM-based PC processors too. In September, Apple extended its deal with ARM through at least 2040. Back when its first custom chip came out 13 years ago, Apple was the only major non-chip company trying to make it in the cutthroat, cost-prohibitive semiconductor market.
Apple's sort of the trailblazer. They sort of showed that if you do this, you can have a stab at differentiating your products, and certainly more players have gone down that route.
In the last few years, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and Tesla are among the other behemoths that can afford to try their hand at custom chips.
I think what everybody was looking for was, does this really bring them a true sustainable advantage, right? Because that's really the question. It's an expensive endeavor.
Designing your own chips is incredibly expensive. Is this CapEx sustainable?
We have thousands of engineers, but if you look at the portfolio of chips we do, very lean, actually. So very efficient. Again, because we focus on the quality of engineers we hire, we focus how we run our teams, and because we're not really selling chips outside, we focus on the product, and that gives us freedom to optimize. And the scalable architecture lets us reuse pieces between different products.
But Apple isn't yet making every piece of silicon in its devices. Modems, for instance, are one big component Apple has yet to conquer on its own.
And their processors have been remarkably good. Where they've struggled is on the modem side, is on the radio side in the phones. Modems are hard, and they've been struggling with it.
Apple uses Qualcomm for its modems, but that relationship is strained following a 2-year legal battle over IP. A settlement brought an end to all legal action in 2019, and then Apple bought the majority of Intel's 5G modem business for $1 billion in a move to develop its own cellular modem. That hasn't happened yet, and in September, Apple signed on with Qualcomm to supply its modems through at least 2026.
Qualcomm still makes the best modems in the world. And honestly, until Apple can do as good of a job, I have a hard time seeing them fully jump to that.
Talk to me about what's going on in modems and the recent announcement to extend the deal with Qualcomm and why that decision was made.
We have a strong team internally working on enabling technologies that would elevate our products. But I can't really give you much and comment on future technologies and products for obvious reasons. But we care about cellular, and we have teams enabling that.
I would argue personally that the longer it takes Apple to move away, the more likely it is that they will never do it, because it's a moving target and it's hard. That being said, Apple's got a very good semiconductor business in general. I wouldn't put anything past them.
Apple is reportedly working on its own Wi-Fi and Bluetooth chip. But for now, it's got a fresh multi-billion-dollar deal with Broadcom for wireless components, and it relies on outsiders like Samsung and Micron for memory.
Does Apple have aspirations to be in charge of every single part of the chip, including, let's say, memory?
Our aspiration is the product. We want to build the best products on the planet. As a technology team, which also includes the chips in this case, if there is a technology that we can buy off the shelf and that delivers to our objective for the product, we'll do it. Because I want to focus the team on what really, really matters.
Regardless of how much of its silicon needs Apple manages to design in-house, it'll still need to manufacture its chips externally at massive fabrication plants owned by foundry companies like TSMC.
It's like anybody else. I mean, they need leading edge semiconductors. There's mostly one place you get those right now, which is Taiwan.
This leaves Apple, like all advanced chip companies, vulnerable amid China's mounting threats of invading Taiwan.
I think there is obviously a lot of tension around like what would plan B be if that happened. There isn't another good option. You would hope that Samsung is also competitive and Intel wants to be there, but again, we're not right now. It's really all at TSMC.
That's why Apple has committed to becoming the largest customer at TSMC's coming fab in Arizona.
We always want to have a diversified supply, Asia, Europe, and the US, which is why I think TSMC building fabs in Arizona is great. And other founders are doing the same. Right? There are other founders, Samsung and Intel, and others, building in the US. So I think that's great.
But another concern is the shortage of skilled chip labor in the US, where advanced fabs haven't been built for decades. TSMC says its Arizona fab is now delayed to 2025 because of a lack of skilled workers. Some have also asked if a fierce talent war for good chip engineers has led to a slowdown in Apple's release of new chips.
There's been questions about, why the iPhone line might have had last year's processor in the lower end and then the newest processor. Some of that also, I think, just might have to do with capacity at TSMC.
Generations are taking longer because they are getting harder and harder. And the ability to pack more and get power efficiency is also different than 10 years ago. But given again, I think this is actually one of the advantages that Apple has, because we're not a chip company. So I don't need to worry about where do I sell my chips.
In 2019, Apple's chip architect Gerard Williams left suddenly to lead a data center chip startup called Nvidia, bringing some Apple engineers with him. Apple sued Williams over IP concerns, then dropped the case this year. Qualcomm bought Nvidia in 2021 in a move to compete in ARM-based PC processors like Apple's.
I can't really discuss legal matters, but we truly care about IP protection. When certain people leave for certain reasons, that's their choice, that's fine. And again, as I mentioned, we have thousands of engineers and we have a deep bench of talent.
Another challenge facing the whole industry is that smartphone sales are just rebounding from their lowest levels in years.
The smartphones have been horrible, right? And part of the issue is like, what is smartphone? They all look like this. It's like some black rectangle of glass. So the industry is playing with things, like they're playing with things like foldables. I think people right now are now hoping that maybe AI will drive an upgrade.
Thanks to hype around large language models like ChatGPT, the need for silicon has skyrocketed in recent months, primarily on the graphics processor side, where companies like Nvidia and AMD dominate. But non-chip companies are also getting in on the trend. Google has designed a tensor processing unit for AI since 2016. Amazon Web Services has had its own AI chips for the data center since 2018. And now Microsoft has a new AI chip, released in November.
What does Apple have in the works when it comes to AI chips?
In A11 Bionic, which we shipped in 2017, and given typically we start a chip many years ahead, it tells you how long we started. We built our machine learning engine. We call it the ANE, Apple Neural Engine. And that's one compute element. We have embedded machine learning accelerators in our CPU. We have our highly optimized GPU for machine learning.
Apple's neural engines power what it calls on-device machine learning features like Face ID and Animojis.
We continue to push and we continue to see more and more applications, more features in our operating system that take advantage of this, and yeah, it's a really exciting time.
In July, Apple reportedly built its own large language model called Ajax and a chatbot called Apple GPT. It's also acquired more than 24 AI companies since 2015.
Critics have been surprised that Apple appears to be falling behind when it comes to AI. How do you respond?
I don't believe we are.
Not too worried.
Not too worried. And actually we have an advantage. Again, go back to we own the silicon, the hardware, the software, the machine learning, all in one team. We're going to optimize for that.
all the things we've seen about in generative AI start to come to these devices at a platform level, right? Apple hasn't been there yet. Apple had an opportunity to really get on that from day one, but I think everyone expects it's coming, in the coming year.
In the meantime, Apple is getting ready to ship its entirely new R1 line of chips for the Vision Pro early next year, which means thousands of engineers like D'Souza will be running them through rigorous testing behind closed doors at Apple's chip labs all over the world.
It's just a source of great pride to say, okay, we worked on this, and here's the end product that we're actually using. It's fascinating.